Well, all right. You have to let me know. All righty, guys. So, who can tell me what's due this evening? Your week one assignment, right? And that is worth beaucoup points. So, have we been working on that or no? Okay, hopefully for days you've been working on it, not just saying, hey, you know what? It's time to take a look at that thing. It's due tonight. I'm sure I can pull it off. I've done it before. Nope. Nope. Again, it's too late now. Like I said, with these assignments, you really cannot start the day it's due. I would say at a minimum 3 days before it's due is when you should be working at that stuff, and that's a minimum because there's a lot to do and not much time to do it. And you've got to fit it in with all the other things you've got to do in your lives. So it's kind of easier if you break it into pieces, work a little bit each day, and then you don't get surprised. And honestly, that's a good work habit to get yourself into. So, you know, like I said, take what you've learned from this week and then extrapolate and work towards doing better next week if you feel like this week wasn't your best run. And what I would say is, you know, from here on out until we get to week 4, it's modeling. We're just doing modeling, modeling, modeling. So you know the essential skills you need to do weeks 2 and 3 in terms of the assignments, other than me showing you how to line up image planes, but we'll do that shortly. You've got you got to get to work early on this stuff. I cannot stress that enough. If you wait to the last minute, you're going to be disappointed. So make sure you're making good use of your time, and you will always be much happier with the grade you got and how successful you were with your work. And that's really anything you do. So today we're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. We're going to be talking about levels of detail, the idea that when we're building things, we build them in a series of passes, each one adding some complexity to the object. We're going to be dealing with, the cleanup tool. I promised you we would talk about that. That's a lot of fun. How do we find problem geometry? Faces with 3 sides are called what? Tries. Faces with 4 sides? And 5 and up? And gons, right? And those are the things we're trying to find and or fix. And it's very important that we do that. So again, we're going to get into all that fun stuff. And hopefully you are excited about learning it as I am to teach it to you. All right, so levels of detail. The idea of levels of detail is not just a drawing thing, but also a modeling thing. We start with very simple and we build towards more complex because it's actually easier to work that way. If you have something that is extremely dense and complex, it's very difficult to make changes to it because you've simply got too many points to work with and it just takes forever. And that's why we don't start with a cube with 20,000 faces on it and then we just push and pull until we have a dragon. That's like the worst way to work. So what we're going to do is we work from low detail to high detail. So we're going to break those detail passes into parts or phases, as it were. All right. Now the first phase is our primary details. And when we're talking about primary details, we're trying to get our primary forms, the basic shapes and volumes that occupy whatever it is we're trying to make. So again, if I'm trying to draw a telephone pole, I start with a cylinder. If I'm trying to model a telephone pole, I also start with a cylinder because that occupies most of what I need right out of the box, and then I can make modifications as I need to improve shape and form. Primary forms. Secondary forms, that's our second pass. Again, once we've gone through the whole model and we've created our primary forms, then we come back up to the top and we go through the whole model again. And now we're doing our secondary forms. It's a higher level of detail, oftentimes connecting our primary forms to each other, showing the transitions between those things. And again, an added level of detail that we're building into our models. Then we come around to our tertiary forms, and our tertiary forms are the finest level of detail. It is what really lends sort of the realism to the stuff we're building. Screws that hold pieces of objects together, latches, connectors, you know, detail elements that make this object different from 1,000 other of the same object. You know, little dents and scratches and that kind of thing. These tertiary details are the finest of the detail level. And again, sort of the last pass as we go through the entire model to make sure we've built that complexity into whatever it is we're making. And again, there's an efficiency to working from light to heavy, just like with drawing. And just to give you an idea about the planning, how many of you guys are illustrators? How many of you guys draw? Okay. Now, have you ever drawn a picture where you're kind of drawing the picture and then you suddenly realize that part of what you wanted to draw would be off the page? And you're just like, I hate that. And then you make it look way shorter, or you try to put some perspective on it, or start again. Well, that comes from not planning soon enough where everything is going to go. When you start with light and basic and work your way towards complex, there are fewer surprises when it comes to drawing. Does that make sense? You don't go off the page. You know where everything is, where you want it to be. It's all been sort of blocked out, as it were, within the frame, and then you know it's all going to fit. But if you start drawing heavy detail and then sort of work out towards the perimeter, you end up going off the paper. Does that make sense? Modeling is the exact same thing. So we try to start very light and very simple. We basically find our shape and form, and then we add detail as we go. We're not changing shape and form on a primary level when we're nearing the end stages of the object. Does that make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, okay. All right. Vocabulary. Again, anytime you see one of these cute little periwinkle things, you know that this is something that's going to appear on your self-grade document. That's right, Mickey, your self-grade document. So if you have this word down, you know what it means. That means points for you. So what we're going to talk about is something called edge quality. And edge quality is the idea where we're talking about how surfaces come together and how they transition from surface to surface. What does that edge actually feel like? The reason being, typically objects do not come together at a 90-degree angle. Even if it looks like a 90-degree angle, it's not really 90 degrees. There's some rounding on that surface, and accurately replicating that that curvature, that rounding, really, again, lends itself to the accuracy and the realism of the object you're building. For example, if you look even at the desk you're sitting at right now, right, that edge right where your waist is, you would think that's a 90-degree angle, but if you run your thumb along that edge, you can feel there's a little bit of rounding there, ever so slightly. Because if it was truly a 90-degree angle, it would be razor sharp and your thumb would just have come off. Did anybody lose their thumb? No, okay, so there must be rounding on those edges. So point being, even what looks to be a 90-degree angle, there's some curvature to that, and we have to build that into the stuff that we're building in order for the surfaces to look realistic. And where this really comes into play is when you start shining light on your models. Light is either your best friend or your worst enemy. Issues with edge flow and topology, issues with edge quality, those things show up as soon as you start shining light on your geometry and apply materials and so forth that should be reacting to that light. So that's why it becomes so important in terms of lending towards the realism of the object we're trying to build. Now, to help you understand edge quality a little bit better, I'm going to use some examples from our world. This is a car, Cadillac, built in the 50s. And if you look at the surfaces here and how we transition from one surface to another, there's a certain amount of rounding that takes place there. The quality of the edges, the way they come together, the way those surfaces display when highlight and shadow strike it. It really tells the story of the design, the lines, or the character, if you will, of the object. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you look at cars made in the 50s, they look similar in design. You can look at a car going down the street and go, that one was probably made in the 50s. And you're probably pretty close to right. The reason being, the look, the feel, the character, or the edge quality of that object is very evident. Does that make sense? Much like the idea that you can have a toy for like an 11-year-old and you can have a toy for a 3-year-old, and it could be the same thing, you know, a pistol versus a pistol. Not that you give pistols to 3-year-olds, but you get the gist. But if you look at these two objects, you can tell this one was made for an older child than this was. This has got a lot of roundedness to it, a lot of rounded corners, and probably a smiley face on it, right? Pistols with smiley faces. Hasbro is lighting up right now. Anyway, point being, you can look at these toys and say, hey, this was obviously made for a much younger child. So again, edge quality tells some of the story and tells the character or the personality of the object in question. So that's why edge quality is an important aspect of the storytelling of the object. Now, here's another Cadillac, but this one was made in the 70s. Totally different quality of the edges here. Look at these hard, strong creases in that surface. And again, where the highlight meets the shadow and those transitions there, much more crisp, much more firm. Again, a totally different personality, a different character or style for those objects, and a very telling aspect of that object. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we want to do is make sure that we are accurately reproducing these ideas. When we're looking at objects, pay very close attention to how surfaces come together and how they transition and what we can do to make that look more realistic. Now, that in mind, we have a super fun tool to help us to do this. Now, it's true in terms of creating edge quality or curvature on a piece of geometry, as I demonstrated in class last time, you can accomplish that using the Insert Edge Loop tool. You can do it using the Extrude tool. Those are two very easy tools for administering edge quality type detail to a piece of geometry, but there's a super easy fun tool to use which will cut that time dramatically in half for us, and it's called the bevel tool. Again, it is very easy to use and pretty fun actually. So what I'd like you to think of in your mind is when you see edge quality, think bevel tool. Does that make sense? Edge quality, bevel tool. I say edge quality, you say edge quality, edge quality. Go polys. All right, so here we go. Edge quality and the bevel tool. So let's take a look at that bevel tool and how easily we can make it do its thing. So first thing we're going to do is set our project, file, set project. You want to use your activity file folder. So make sure you select just the outer folder of that, set. Now we open, file, open scene, and bevel tool activity is right up there at the top. Boom, don't save. No, that's okay. That's okay. Awesome. All right, so here we go. My bevel tool playground. Now, in terms of the bevel tool, its purpose is to remove that angularity of surfaces as they come together. Like if you look at these two surfaces, they look very crisp and very hard. Is that not true? You agree with me on that? Okay, so this is what looks very unrealistic. It looks very CG, if you will, or very gamey, like a video game asset. Does that make sense? Because it's very low poly. Now, in the instance of low poly modeling for games. But in terms of this geometry, again, very unlikely the surfaces come together like that. So here's where we can use the bevel tool to marvelous effect. Now the bevel tool works on edges. So what you want to do is select the edges, and you'll note I'm not grabbing just one, but I'm grabbing several edges at a time. And then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and you'll see the bevel tool. Now what I really like about the bevel tool is it comes with this little interactive dialog box that you can manipulate and kind of make adjustments while you're looking at it. So it's kind of fun. So when you hit the bevel tool, again, it's like taking a piece of sandpaper to the corners of the object and kind of sanding it down. So we've got these different things we can play with. The first attribute is fraction. So if you take your cursor and put it over the word fraction, and if you hold down your left mouse button and drag left and right, you'll see that fraction is actually talking about how much of the corners am I sanding off of this object, because you can sand quite a bit to, you know, very, very little. And you can literally plug in a number if you want to, if you want a value in between there, but you can set it for however much you want to adjust. Now the next attribute that we're going to play with is segments. And what segments is talking about is how many edges am I going to put in between these two edges you just created, that sanded area. So if you hover your cursor over that word and hold down your left mouse button and drag left and right, you will see that it will populate that little area with segments. And just like any polygon object, again, between 2 points, you can only have a straight line. So the more lines you have, the more smooth the curvature appears. So you can make it quite smooth, just a little bit smooth, or not very. So it's up to you, really. All right. Now, the next thing that we can adjust is depth. And depth, this is pretty fun because what this is talking about is how much sort of rounded curvature that little sanded off area receives. So by holding down the left mouse button, you can reduce the curvature, and if you go into a negative value, you can literally invert it somewhat and give yourself kind of like a Pizza Hut roof. So you can, again, sort of adjust the amount of bubbliness to it, if you will, and that curvature and that smoothness, utilizing that depth function. Y'all ready for this? All right. So again, that's what depth does for you. And what you will really appreciate is when you then let go of the object and you look at, oh, look at how the light is playing on the corners now. That's totally different on the top versus what I was seeing on the side there. And you can see it kind of makes it much more interesting to look at, a lot more realistic in terms of the curvature there. Now, here's where we start looking at, okay, so what does this tool exactly do for me? Again, it creates curvature. So if I'm looking at a cylinder, is a cylinder curved? Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, look, I've got a nice gradient, right? I've got a little curvature here on the surface. Do you think this tool will be very effective in making this more curved? Let's take a look. I'm going to go to edge mode. I'm going to grab the edges, edit mesh, bevel. Oh yeah, that accomplished absolutely nothing. Does that make sense? It's already curved. You don't use it on a curved surface. You use it where hard edges come together. So obviously this tool is not going to be very effective there. But might it be effective around this part? Let's say I'm trying to make this into, oh, I don't know, a beer bottle lip. I can use this. So again, I can click an edge, hold shift and grab additional edges, or I can just double click on one edge and it goes all the way around. Edit mesh bevel. And again, I'll adjust the fraction, add some segments, and then look at that. That looks nice and smooth there. Very nice. And of course, we want to do it on the interior as well, because, you know, if you're going to save yourself from cutting your lip wide open on the outside, why wouldn't you do the inside too? So again, go to edge mode, select the entire edge loop by double clicking, edit mesh bevel, fractions, segments, boom. Does that make sense? Super fast, super easy, and it just really sort of makes those objects look a little bit more interesting, more realistic in terms of what kind of object it is. So again, that bevel tool, a great tool. Once you're done modeling, okay, this thing looks great. Let me start using the bevel tool here and there and see if I can round some corners a little bit. Again, it's just sort of the icing on the cake that makes it look really nice. So I have this other object over here that I want you guys to play with just so that you can see how things work. And just be aware when you're using the bevel tool is very powerful, but it's a little bit reckless too. So in terms of beveling things, you got to be very careful of where you're beveling and how you're beveling it, because it will create wonky geometry. You're going to end up with triangles. You're going to end up with n-gons. So you got to look for that stuff. And if there was an issue, try to fix it. But again, it can still help you accomplish some very interesting things. Just make sure you're double checking your edge flow after the fact to make sure that you haven't created some really bad geometry in the process. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to take a quick walk around and just see that you guys have been able to use the bevel tool. Look at that.
All right.
We are go for lunch. Are we getting good audio there? Are we back in, my digital friends? Can you hear me?
Yes, they're all smiles.
Awesome. Good. Okay. So again, what I was saying before, I don't know how much of that you caught before you went to the dark side of the moon, but what we were talking about is the fact that the things that we're talking about today are not expected to be on your week 1 turn-in. So things like edge quality, using the bevel tool, you don't have to use that for your week 1 turn-in, what's due tonight. But do I encourage you, if you have time, to use it? Yeah, it's a good idea. Why not play with it and see how it works? Also, this clean geometry thing we're talking about, am I going to be looking for clean geometry on your week 1 turn-in? No, but I will be doing it on week 2, so why not get in the habit now and start making sure that you're ready for the next series of turn-ins. So let's talk about this, making sure we've got clean geometry. And again, our goal is to have mostly 4-sided pieces of geometry. 3-sided is okay here and there, but 5 or more is never okay. So we're trying to make sure we're staying out of that. And in terms of bad geometry, what I'd like you to do is try to think of yourself as like a polygon doctor. So we're building stuff, but whatever we build, that's our patient. And we're trying to make sure that it's healthy and happy, and it's going to go on to have a normal polygon life. So in terms of the polygon, yes, it's true, we're creating art, but we're using a machine and numbers and a mathematical equation or algorithm to figure it out. So what we have to do is make sure they're both working when we create stuff. So in terms of geometry issues, there can be all kinds of problems that stem from mathematically unsound geometry. We can have tools not work. We can have files become corrupted. We can have render times be very long. We can also have renders crash completely. And all of this comes from mathematically unsound geometry. And again, for the same reason you build houses out of good quality materials when you're building them, unless you're building them as fast as you can to make as much money as possible and rip off the population a little bit. Or you do it the right way and you build things properly, you use good sound materials, and then they last a long time and things work well. So there's different ways of doing it. Polygons, same kind of thing. We want to make sure that we're building strong, mathematically sound stuff that will work well, because it's going to go through a whole series of stops on this CG production pipeline, and we want to make sure it's functional throughout. So what we have to do is learn to spot and fix problems. So here's what I'm going to do for you guys. I'm going to explain to you the different things that are ailments for polygon objects, different issues that will cause problems, so that when you see them, you recognize them. Does that make sense? Diagnosis, that's phase 1. Phase 2, treatment. How do I fix it when I see that problem? So first I'm going to show you the problems, and then we're going to delve into how do I fix those problems. Does that make sense? Okay, so make sure you've got your pencils or however you're documenting these various elements so that you have them all, because there's more than 2 or 3. All right. Now, this first issue, unsupported vertices. Here's the issue. I've got a series of vertices, and they're just sort of floating in space. Now, it's true I might need this detail, but having those vertices not properly connected to other vertices is a problem, mathematically unsound. Not to mention the fact that this is an 8-sided face, which is definitely an n-gon, so we know that's a no-no. But what we want to do is, if we need this kind of detail, look, if we just connect these things to each other, that's perfectly okay. That is acceptable. You can have holes and stuff, that's totally fine. But there's a way to do it properly, and then there's the improper way to do it. Does that make sense? You always want to have your vertices connected to each other. Make sense? Okay. So, unsupported vertices are a no-no. All right? Non-planar faces. Again, this is an issue. The idea of non-planar faces is the idea that, let's say, I want you to think of each face of polygon geometry on whatever it is you're building. Think of it like a piece of paper, right? And at each corner, there's a point. When they're flat or relatively flat, they're all in the same plane. Non-planar is when you have a vertice that is out of position relative to the others. I'm causing some torsion or distortion to the polygon face. Does that make sense? Anytime you have a change in shape on a polygon object, that change has to be supported by an edge loop. There's got to be an edge there. And if there's not an edge there, then you obviously have non-planar faces, which again can lead to a lot of issues in terms of the lighting and rendering, tool use, and the gamut. So we have to be very careful about trying to keep those guys in alignment. Now it's true, not everything is perfectly flat. You know, there's some curvature to things, and in some instances you need to have a little bit of curvature, but there are acceptable tolerances you have to be careful of. Does that make sense? Okay, and as you go, you get better at realizing what's okay and what's not, but we try to keep it as flat as we can. And if you have to bend a face that much, what that's telling you is you need more polygons in that area. You don't have enough edges and vertices to make that detail. You need some more, because this is where you're working it too hard. All right, lamina faces. How many of you guys have seen this one already? Yeah, as soon as you learn the extrude tool, you learn this one. Yeah, anytime you see that crazy shading, that moire pattern on there, they call that Z fighting or depth fighting. What's going on there is that's Maya's cute little way of telling you, hey, I'm having a hard time figuring out these surfaces and how they relate to the outside or inside of the object, and how do I create shading and lighting for it, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Now, in terms of polygon geometry, when we're trying to change the shape of it, we have vertices to work with, we have edges, and we have faces, right? Those are our primary modeling components. There are other components as well to polygon geometry, several, one of which is called the normal. And the normal is basically how Maya figures out the light and the shadow on the surface of an object, and indirectly the inside and the outside of the object. Now, the way I'd like you to imagine it, every face of polygon geometry has one of these little normals sticking out of it. And it's kind of like temperatures, or thermometers read temperature. The normals read light. So what happens is the normal says, I am facing directly at the light source, and therefore I should get this much light. Or I am offset from the light source somewhat, and therefore should get this much light. Or I am facing away from the light source, and therefore I shouldn't get any light at all, or very little direct light. Does that make sense? That's what the normal does. It reads light, like thermometers read temperature. Now, you can't always see the normals. They're typically hidden until you ask them to be visible. So, for example, if you want to see the normals on an object, you have to select the object in object mode and go to Display, Polygons, and then choose Face Normals. And it literally causes these little things to appear. And they look like these little sort of cactus spikes, one for each face. And obviously, the more dense the geometry, the more little spikes you get on there. And again, they show you, or they help Maya figure out shading and lighting. Where does the light go? Where does the shadow go? And you'll notice when you look at a polygon object, they're not on the inside, because the other part of the story that they tell is what's the inside and what's the outside. Does that make sense? Because the light should be coming from the outside. So these normals are very helpful. Now, how does that relate to what I'm seeing here? When you have lamina faces, basically what you've got are two faces that occupy exactly the same space. So Maya can't figure out, well, if they both occupy exactly the same space, which one gets light? Which one gets shadow? What's the inside? What's the outside? I don't know. So you get that crazy moire pattern on there saying there's something wrong with your geometry. And that's what the issue is. I've got two faces on top of each other. Does that make sense? So you got to think of each face of your polygon geometry almost like a leaf, you know, on a plant of some kind. They all need light. And if it's covered, it's a problem. Does that make sense? Okay, so we want to get those guys out in the light. And then again, you avoid this lamina faces issue. All right, non-manifold geometry. Non-manifold geometry comes in 3 varieties. All right. The first one, the issue is I've got 3 faces sharing the same edge. So the problem here is I've got 1, 2, 3 faces, and they're all connected by that one edge. Paper thin, ridiculously crazy thin edge. Now, if you had to make a detail that looked like that, you would actually have this be a little bit thicker, and then you would have a second edge that runs along here, and that would allow you to pull that detail out, and then that would be fine because you don't have 3 faces sharing the same edge. All right. Second variety of non-lamina faces, 2 faces that are connected by a single vertice. If you've got a face connected to another face, there has to be at least 2 vertices to connect them. You can't connect by just one. The bizarre example I like to give is you can't attach your arm to your body by a single cell, right? It's not going to work. It's too small. So point being, got to have at least 2 vertices connected to each other. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the third one, faces with opposite normals. We just talked about the normals, right? Those little indicators of light and shadow. So if I look at a piece of polygon geometry, this face receives light. This face receives light this way. So Maya thinks this is the outside of that face, and this is the outside of that face. So the problem I have is I've got 2 faces with opposite normals right next to each other. That's impossible. You can't have the inside and the outside right next to each other. And another bizarre example that I like to give for that one, imagine you could cut out a square from your cheek, remove the skin, flip it over, and then sew it back into place. How weird would that look? Right? Good. That's the inside and the outside right next to each other. You have to have an inside and an outside, and there's definitely a difference between the 2. Again, if you look at your cheek, the outside wraps around and then goes into the inside. They're not right next to each other. There's a transition. Does that make sense? Inside and outside are separate. So they can't be right next to each other like that. Does not make any sense. Faces with 0 surface area. All right, the issue here is I've got faces with no surface area. They're basically squashed down to the thickness of an. Now, these little dots, you can turn those on or off. That's a preference thing. When you go into face mode, you can have it set for show me the faces. And it will give you these little dots wherever the faces are. And that's what you have to click on to select the face. But if you take a look at this, you look up here and you go, wait a minute, there's a dot, but it's on an edge. That's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be in the middle of the face like this one is. What's that telling me? Well, what that's telling me is there's a face in there. If I grab that vertice on the corner and lift it up, I'll see the face inside. It's just been squashed down to the thickness of an edge. So again, Maya's problem is, how do I light a face that has no surface area? How do I mathematically calculate a tool making an adjustment to geometry with 0 surface area? You can see where the problems start to happen because Maya's an application using an algorithm, a mathematical formula. You know, everything is 1s and 0s. So how do you calculate out something with 0 surface area? It's not, you know, the math starts getting wonky when you have to do that. And that's why it has problems. And that's why then you have problems, because when you make life rough on Maya, Maya makes life rough on you. So we're trying to make good math so that everything runs smoothly and works like we would expect it to and want it to, with fewer hiccups. No, that's a great question, because we're going to talk about the fixes next. What do I do to fix these things? Because they're all fixable. Everything is very easily fixed. The key is, though, recognizing it for what it is and then knowing how to fix it. So as long as you got those 2 things, you are all good. Does that make sense? So fret ye not, we can save this patient. But we have to know what the ailment is or what it looks like first, so we know what to treat it. Okay. Now, I know you're wondering, oh man, with all of these elements and all of these problems, how am I going to find them all? This is impossible. Well, the good news is there's a tool in Maya called the cleanup tool, and it literally helps you find things. So if you tell it what to look for, it will find it. So you can say, hey, find me polygon geometry with the sniffles. And then it will find you all the geometry that have the sniffles, and then you can cure it. If you say, show me all the polygons that have a temperature, it will show you these ones have a temperature if you understand the parallel. Does that make sense? But the key is you have to look for things one thing at a time. Because if you tell Maya, give me everything that's got a temperature, runny nose, cough, sore throat, itchy eyes, feet are feeling funny, vibrations in the hands, teeth on backwards. Like if you give it too many parameters, it will select everything and you can't figure out what's wrong, where it is, or what the problem is. Does that make sense? So what we do is we look for problems one at a time. We isolate and fix. Make sense? Okay, so let's take a look at the cleanup tool and how it works. All right. Now the cleanup tool is going to help you do that. Oh, and the important thing to remember about the cleanup tool, aside from where it is, it's all under mesh, but a very important thing for you to realize about the cleanup tool is it actually comes in two modes. One is show me the problem and I will fix it. And the other is you fix the problem. I don't care. Do you see any inherent dangers with you fix the problem, I don't care? Yes. Is Maya an artist? No. Is Maya creative? Nope. Name implies it, but nope. The people are creative. The people who designed this application are creative. Maya itself, not overly creative. Now, since Maya is not an artist, Maya is not necessarily creative, and Maya does not know the objectives of my assignment, do we let Maya decide anything for us? No, very dangerous, right? That's how we got Skynet. So we don't do things like that. So what we want to do is we make sure very first thing when we're using the cleanup tool is we set it for select the problem I'm asking about. Don't fix it. Don't make it better. Don't take over the world and destroy humanity. Just show me where the problem is. I will handle it. Does that make sense? I will handle it. So when we go to get the cleanup tool, it is under mesh. You go down a little bit towards the bottom quarter of it or so, and you'll see optimize as a category. And that's where the cleanup tool is. And we're actually I'm gonna show you some fixes on some polygon geometry, and then you'll be able to do it too. All right, now the example model that I'm going to show you all these fixes on is the example model you're gonna work on for your skill check for this particular class. So since it is a skill check, I will have to set my project to that file folder, set project, and I'm gonna go to my skill check files and hit set. File open scene, and you'll see the cleanup project. All right, now I have this really nifty blaster, which you might recognize as, whose blaster is that? Han Solo's. Is that crazy? We all know that. Now, it looks pretty cool. It's a nice model, but it has a lot of problems. It has a lot of mathematical issues with it. And the fact that it looks great, well, it looks great. That doesn't necessarily make it a good piece of polygon geometry. So we're going to figure out what's wrong with it and how to fix it. Now, just like I was saying before, you don't want to have everything visible at one time because it's hard to tell what's going on, what are you fixing, it gets confusing and what have you. So each of the issues have been placed on layers, one layer for each issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the V for visibility on all the layers so that everything's turned off, and then I will literally go back and fix things one at a time, and then you'll understand how that works. All right, so the first layer here is n-gons, and that's the only layer that's visible. So what I know is there, because we've identified it for you, is that there are n-gons on this piece of geometry. In looking at it, you might not necessarily know. So here's how we find the problems. First, you select the geometry that you're trying to test or find out what's wrong with it. And again, these are the steps for using the cleanup tool. Step 1, select the geometry in object mode. All right. Step 2, go to Mesh, Cleanup, and open the tool. Step 3, very important. The tool defaults to clean up matching polygons. That's another way of saying, Maya, you fix it. I don't care what you do. That's a bad idea. Do not leave it set for that. You want to switch it to select matching polygons. Show me the issue. I will fix it because I know better than you do. Select matching polygons. Now, these are the different elements you could be looking for. Uncheck them all. You want them all unchecked. And then you can look for them one at a time. So for example, on this layer, we're looking for n-gons. N-gons are faces with more than 4 sides. So if I select faces with more than 4 sides as a search parameter, and I hit apply, boop, Maya will select for me faces with more than 4 sides. Now, it could be anywhere on this object. What key did I teach you guys that allows you to focus on something really fast and zoom it into your F, right? So I could just press F, boom, and it's going to zoom right in on whatever's selected. Again, the problem geometry. Now I could go to wireframe mode to see where it is. Or if I want to stay in shaded mode, I could just look around a little bit and, oh yeah, I see it. That is definitely an n-gon. Does that make sense? More than 4 sides. So then I have to go about fixing it. Now, what tool did I tell you guys is great for fixing n-gons? There's one of them that's really good. Not necessarily insert edge loop, but similar to it, the multi-cut. Insert edge loop is a great tool for dropping edge loops in. And I can see why you would think, oh, that's got to be the one because that'll fix it. But the insert edge loop tool comes in 2 modes. And that's either A, fix the problem geometry and put edge loops wherever you want to, just make it happy. And B, do things normally, in which case it won't even cut faces that have more than 4 sides. The tool literally won't function. So I don't want Maya reconfiguring my edge looping, and I certainly know that the tool won't necessarily help me. And just to show you, I'll go over here to my mesh tools, I'll get my insert edge loop tool, and if I try to use it, you'll see it's just putting edges wherever. It's making more bad geometry. Does that make sense? It doesn't know any better. So insert edge loop, although a powerful tool and lots of fun to play with, not really the best one here. Multi-cut, fabulous for this kind of thing. So I'm going to go to mesh tools, and this time I'm going to use my multi-cut. And what I'm going to do is come up here, and here I can see this is an n-gon. I see there should be an edge there. You know, I must have accidentally deleted it or something, but I can replace it. And all I have to do is come over to the edge in question, click on the edge and drag. And you know, once you click on an edge, it won't go outside of that area. But what I want to do is drag it until it gets caught. It won't go down any further. It seems like an anchor, like you just stuck it against the rock or something to climb up it. So now it's hooked down there. I let go, come to the other side, click and drag, and then it gets hooked down there. Right mouse button, boom, fixed. I'm going to come up here and do the same thing. Click and drag down. This one I can't really drag down, but I can click down here and drag up. And again, takes care of the problem. Click and drag, right mouse, click and drag, right mouse. All right, getting better. Click and drag, right mouse, click and drag. Now watch this one. You'd think I have to go here. Nope, I can even skip a layer. Go to that one, right mouse, boom, it cut it for me. Click and drag. Look at that. Click and drag all the way across. It's going to put 2 in there for me. Shaboom. Now I've fixed it. everything's okay. Everything's got 4 sides. Does that make sense? Very simple, but I solved the problem. I have removed that threat. So now, when I go to object mode, select the geometry, show me faces with more than 4 sides, they don't light up. I've solved the problem. That's no longer an issue. Make sense? All right. So that's n-gons. Let's take a look at floating vertices. Next issue down. Let's go to let's take a look at this one. Where's my floating vertices? Now this one might come up. Again, here's my cleanup tool. Whoops. Here's my cleanup tool. 4-sided faces with more than 4 sides. Show me. And I go, wait a minute. All those showed up as faces with more than 4 sides, but they look like they have 4 sides. What the heck? How could that possibly be? Well, the problem is this thing's got floating vertices, vertices that are not properly connected. Now, you wouldn't know it until you went to vertex mode. So I go to vertex mode. You see these guys here? Remember our unsupported vertices problem? These are vertices just kind of hanging in space. Does that make sense? Now these vertices, again, are causing problems because these are n-gons and these are unsupported vertices. So this is going to make tools not work, renders crash, files corrupt. So we got to clean this up. Now the good news is, in terms of fixing that, all you have to do is select the vertice and hit delete, and it goes away. Select the vertice, hit delete. Now you might be worried, well, what happens if I select any old vertice and hit delete? Nothing. If a vertice is properly connected, you can't delete them by selecting them. You can select them and just hit delete, nothing will happen. So what you can do is grab the whole model in vertex mode, and if you hit delete, only the vertices that are not properly connected will disappear. Everybody else stays, right? They're all gone, all those extra vertices. Now, here's something to think about though. What happens if I'm modeling, right? And I have a detail in my model that looks like this. You guys seeing this? Okay. Now, if I select all the vertices in my model, actually I'll grab everybody, like I don't know what's going to happen. If I select all the vertices in my model, I hit delete. Do you see how the shape of the model changed? Because those vertices, although they were not properly connected, were affecting detail that I had on my model. Does that make sense? So what you have to ask yourself is, if I grab all the vertices and I hit delete and my model does not change shape, or if it does change shape, that doesn't make any difference, then I'm fine, I'm all done. But if this needs to look like this, if I'm modeling a flying saucer, if I hit this and delete, it looks different. It's not a flying saucer anymore. So that's a problem. So what I would have to do is literally connect these guys to each other. And what I could do, again, is use my multi-cut tool. And I'd have to connect them to each other. Does that make sense? If you need that shape, connect them. If you don't need that shape, just delete them. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay. Let's look at flipped normals, our next ailment. Now, flipped normals are actually pretty easy to spot because your geometry looks jet black, which is usually an indication of the inside of your geometry. It's inside out. That's why the normals are on the wrong side. Now, In order to double check it though, you can check and see, okay, well, where are the normals? Again, select the geometry and object mode, display, polygons, face normals. And you get these nice little spiky things. Now I know you're looking at that and you're going, wait a minute, you said the spikes are supposed to be on the gray side, not the dark side. What happened? But if you go inside this little wheel, you can see, oh yeah, there's the normals. They're just coming from here, sticking through, and they're poking out to the outside. So it is still inside out, just the little cactus needles are poking all the way through. So what we need to do is basically reverse it. So the outside is the inside and the inside is the outside. So the way to do that, 1, select your geometry and object mode. 2, go to mesh display and just choose reverse. And literally, it just flips it the other way around. Watch, before, after, before, after, before, after. And what you'll notice is A, the geometry turns nice and gray, indicating the outside is facing out. And if you go inside, you'll see it's very dark in there. And if you select the geometry, you'll see almost all the spikes are on the outside. And when you go inside, there's hardly any at all. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Does that make sense? Select the geometry and object mode, mesh display, reverse. Boom. To get rid of those spiky things, you have to do what you did to turn them on. Display, polygons, face normals. Turn them off. All right. Let's look at non-planar faces. All right. Here we go. Non-planar faces. Now again, this one is pretty easy to spot because what happens is, do you see how there's like a hard edge here which separates the geometry from the sky, as it were, the background in your Maya world? There's an edge there that separates it on the top and the bottom. If you look over here, do you see how the gray kind of touches the sky out there? There's no separation of those two. And what that's showing you is there's a lot of bending or torsion on those faces. So I've got to change in the shape of my face without an edge to support the detail. Does that make sense? So what you want to do is just kind of relieve that torsion somehow. And it couldn't be easier. All you have to do is go into vertex mode, in this instance, and grab the top row of vertices. And then using your rotate tool, just rotate them to take that twist out. And now when you look at the geometry, do you see how there's a hard edge to separate the object from the background now? It doesn't have that bend or that twist in it, so it's fine. So all you have to do is kind of sort of relieve that torsion on the geometry. Again, not a tricky thing once you've seen it done. All right, let's look at that faces with 0 surface area, which is typically an example of a double extrude. Now looking at this, you'd never know there was a problem because it looks normal. But watch, notice that I'm on my select tool, I select a face, and then I go to my move tool, and when I move it, yeah, weirdness, right? Oh boy. What have I done? Bad things are happening. Does that make sense? Now, like I said, you might not know you've done a double extrusion or you have these faces with 0 surface area. But one way that you can test is to turn on those little dots. Now, like I told you, that's a preference thing. You don't have to have that on. Some people think it's handy. I think for beginners, it's a good idea. But if you go to the word Maya in your upper left-hand corner, click it, and from the drop-down, choose Preferences. And this is how you access all of Maya's preferences. So this is a good thing to know how to do anyway. Open up your preferences, and you'll see it breaks everything down by category over here, and then the specifics are over here. And incidentally, if at any time Maya's doing something weird, you don't recognize it, things don't look like they have the same layout, just go to the word Edit and choose Restore Default Settings. And that returns Maya to factory brand new, the way it came out of the box. So if you accidentally changed your interface or something weird happened, you can reset it there. But what we're talking about is putting those little dots on faces. So what we're going to do is scoot down through our categories, and we're going to find Selection as a category. And in Selection, you'll see Polygon Selection, select faces with center or whole face. Whole face is the idea that you can hover your cursor over any part of the face and the whole face lights up. What I want is little dots in the center. So I click that and I hit Save. Now I got these cute little dots. I can't select by putting my cursor over here, but as soon as I get over a dot, I can select. Does that make sense? Okay. So when I look at this, I see, oh yeah, dot in the middle, dot in the middle, dot in the middle, but I also see dots on edges. So again, the first giveaway that I've done something terrible when I did my extrusion. Now, sometimes you can just select those dots and delete them, and it fixes the problem. You literally select it and hit delete. Oop, there was two of them there. You see that? I had to do it twice. Select, hit delete, still one there. Select, hit delete. There, and I got them both. Select, delete, select, delete, select, delete. There's only one there. And then that usually cleans up the problem, but something you have to be very careful of. Sometimes Maya will attach those pieces together after you delete the faces out, sometimes not. Because if you look, if I grab this, that piece is no longer connected. Does that make sense? Okay, so what do I do if that's the case? I got to get rid of those dots, but when I select them and delete them, the face comes off. Well, I'm going to have to do something else. I'm going to have to merge the vertices together. Now, there's a great tool in Maya called the Merge tool, and this is really handy for issues like this in particular. But you have to understand that in terms of the way the Merge tool works, the most important thing is threshold. And when you hear the word threshold, what you should be thinking is distance. That's what that is, distance. So how does the threshold tool work, or the Merge tool work? What's threshold exactly? Imagine I'm a vertice, and Brian is a vertice, and you are a vertice. All right? Welcome to the vertices. Now, let's say Brian and I are 1 grid unit apart. You and I are 4 grid units apart. Does that make sense? Grid units, the distance we measure with in Maya. So if I select Brian, myself, and you, we're all selected, and my threshold is set for 1, Brian and I become 1 vertice. You do not. You're still separate because you are outside of the threshold of 1. Does that make sense? If I set it for 2, Brian and I are still 1 vertice, and you are not part of the club anymore. Does that make sense? I can set it for 3. We're still not going to merge. If I set it for 4, we are all within 4 grid units of each other, so we all merge into 1 vertice. Does that make sense? And that's why threshold is important, because you need to be careful with it. It can be messy if you get it wrong. So let me show you what happens when you get it wrong, because it's hysterical. Let's assume I'm trying to fix this model, and I'm going to use the merge option. So I grab some vertices, right, in the affected area, and I go to Edit Mesh, Merge, and again, here's my threshold. I'm going to leave the threshold at something ridiculous like 10. Anything within 10 grid units merges. Now it's true, I kind of fixed the problem, but did I make things better? No, exactly. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all the vertices in the selected area, right? These are the problem areas. But when I use my merge tool, I'm going to use a very small threshold, like 0.001. That way, only vertices that are right on top of each other will actually merge. If they're outside of right on top of each other, they do nothing. Does that make sense? So when I run it like that, everything stays the same. And when I go to face mode, do you see all the little dots are gone? Because Maya basically went to the corners where all the problems were and said, hey, if there's more than one vertex in there, glue them together, make them one, and effectively removed all of those faces. They disappear. Does that make sense? Threshold, that's why that's important. You got to know how that works. If you set it too high, it's like turning a black hole loose. You got to be careful with that one. All right, let's look at the interior faces problem. I know interior faces is kind of weird sometimes, the idea. What do you mean interior faces? Because you don't see them without a trained eye, even when you're in wireframe. But take a look at this. I'm going to go into X-ray mode. And do you see that double shaded area? It's darker than everywhere else. That's because there's faces in there. It's inside. If you could imagine, there's like a floor inside of this thing. And I can go to the first floor or the second floor of this object. Now I don't really need those faces in there. They're not doing anything but adding to my poly count, right? And confusing my tools, because each of these faces is a non-planar face, because I've got a face above and a face on the bottom and another face here. So I've got three faces sharing the same edge. Does that make sense? You see how that's non-planar? So that's going to cause problems with my tools. So again, I don't need those faces. The good news is it's a really easy fix. All you have to do is go inside and literally select the faces and delete them. So I'm going to come in here, grab the faces I want. And again, you get better at kind of looking into the geometry and seeing what's going on in there. See those faces? I don't need any of those. And they're all non-planar because I've got one face, two face, three faces sharing the same edge. So that's that non-planar issue. But what I can do is just select those faces and hit delete. They're all gone. Now it's totally hollow. And again, you don't see that double shading issue, right? I don't see that middle floor anymore. It's gone. Make sense? Okay. All right, now that brings us to problem hunt number 1. Take it out of X-rays. That doesn't look too crazy. All right. So here is your skill check. Wait, let me get to that slide. Boop. Here's your skill check using the cleanup tool on an object. So in this instance, again, this is problem hunt 1. This is the only one you have to do for the skill check. You don't have to do problem hunt 2. But if you want more practice, by all means, do it. But here is the barrel part of Han Solo's gun. Throughout this gun, there are problems. Several problems on each piece sometimes. I'm not going to tell you what the problems are, but I have shown you the tool that will help you find the problem, and I've showed you how to fix them. So your job is to find the issues with this gun and fix them based on what you know about the elements and how to make them better. I'll show you an example. So let's say the first thing we're going to look for is n-gons. So if I look at this, I select the object in object mode, mesh, cleanup, look for faces with more than 4 sides, clean up, hit F to frame it. Okay, this face, this face, this face, this face, this face, and this face are n-gons. Doesn't look like there's any others. I'll go to wireframe to check. Nope, just those guys. Okay. Now, you might be thinking, well, how the heck do I fix that? But if you look at it, you can see, yeah, I'm kind of missing some edges. I can see where those are missing. And the interesting thing is if you look right down here, there's another example of what it probably should look like, because there is symmetry to these objects, right? So it kind of gives you a bit of a hint of how this should probably be cut. What tool did I say we used to fix that? Multi-cut, right? So you just got to go in there and reconfigure this. So cut each piece. And again, there's an example piece so you know how to do it. It's not like you have to completely make it up, but that will help you to fix that. All right, that's your n-gons. And again, you different things. Are there floating vertices? Are the normals backwards? Are there non-planar faces? Is there a double extrude? Do I have interior faces? Just look for those things one at a time using your cleanup tool options, right? Non-planar faces, lamina faces. Does that make sense? Maya will find them for you. Just look for them one at a time. Non-manifold geometry. But make sure you're doing them one at a time, because if you ask it for too many things, you might not know 100% what you've been shown, right? Yes. Yes, you must select it in object mode. Yep, whichever piece you're looking at. You don't want to select the whole thing. You just grab one piece at a time. Okay, does this have n-gons on it? Does it have non-planar faces on it? Does it have non-manifold geometry? Okay, next piece. Does it have n-gons? Does that make sense? You got to find what's wrong with it and fix it. One thing at a time.
Sometimes with the multi-cut tool is some vertices will be softened in more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Make a cut.
You might have to move it a little bit. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, Maya is not, you know, I don't want to use the word perfect, but Maya can't read your mind, and Maya has no idea what you're trying to do. So it has really no artistic capacity, really, other than what it's been sort of programmed to do. So in terms of what we do, we're the artists. So when we put edges in there, that may, you know, satisfy and make things four-sided, but we still have to move the vertices to make it look right. You know, that's where we're getting back to the art again. Okay, now it's mathematically sound. Let's now work on making it look good again. So you might have to make some adjustments. Absolutely. So you're thinking, wow, why can't Maya just do that itself? Heck, why can't you just press a button and make people, rocket ships, tanks, you know, whatever it is you want? You just go rocket ship, spaceship, demon. You know, you press the buttons and they come out. Well, here's the thing, kiddies. If you could just press buttons and get whatever you wanted and it would turn out perfect, this wouldn't be a job. Does that make sense? If Maya does everything on its own, they don't need us for anything. So there's not a job in that. There's no pay in that. So thank goodness it's not easy. You know, thank goodness it's not for everybody, because that's what means we actually have a job and we can get paid, you know, pretty decently to do this, because not everybody can do it. It's hard. It's complicated. A lot of pressure. That's the kind of work it is. So yeah, it could be easier. Yeah, and it might not be a job. It might not pay well. You got to look at the pros and the cons of everything. And remember, in terms of how technical and complicated this is actually a very intuitive and fun interface. It's pretty easy to work with. Once you get the hang of it, it's really nice. In the old days, when they tried to make art in 3D, they had to plot points in space. Like literally, they would give it the coordinates and it would make a vertice. And then you'd have to plug in the coordinates and it would make another vertice. And then you connect them to each other. You're like, okay, 3 more of these and I'll have a face. They literally had to build the object one point at a time by calculating in space where the points had to be. I think I'd rather have water torture than that. So, you know, thank goodness we've got this interface. But at this point, it is still a difficult job. Therefore, it's not the easiest job in the world to get, and it pays pretty decently because it is very challenging. It's a very demanding line of work. Does that make sense? So yeah, easy is not necessarily good. All right, so again, this is your skill check. You got to clean up all the pieces of the gun. There are several pieces with several issues. Use the cleanup tool, run through the various things you need to look at and figure out what's wrong with it, fix it, and turn it in. Just problem hunt 1. Like I said, if you wanted to do 2, go ahead and do 2. But in terms of your priorities, obviously your week 1 turn-in is the major focus of your attention. So you want to make sure you finish that with plenty of time to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure while using the self-grade document that you did everything you need to do. The week 1 turn-in is the easiest by far. By far. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, week 1's kind of hard. Well, that's because you just learned how to do this. So yeah, it's going to be hard. This is the easiest one. They only get harder as we go. So build up your grade point average early by doing awesome on the first turn-in. Does that make sense? Because they definitely get harder. And when we get into week 4, you're going to be begging for mercy. So do well early. Always a good idea. Make sense? Okay. And again, I don't tell you that to scare you. That's not my intention. I'm giving you a realistic perspective so that you can make smarter decisions. Does that make sense? I want you to make a good decision. And if you know what you're up against, you're going to make a better call. And that's why I tell you, look, don't fall into these pitfalls. Trust me on this one. I'm not making it up. Okie dokie. Cool, cool. Okay, so again, remember for your turn-in, look over that self-grade document before you submit your work, because you may catch something. Show it to somebody else. Show it to an instructor. Show it to one of the studio artists. Come to the Google Hangout and show it to somebody in there. 4 eyes are better than 2, so it helps. They can find stuff. Oh, whoa, you forgot that. Oh yeah, cool, thanks. That could be a letter grade difference right there. So make sure you're following all the directions thoroughly. Have your work looked at whenever and wherever you can, because feedback is critical. And I typically recommend stop working at 11 p.m. and then start wrapping up turn-in. Make your folders, use your self-grade document, because creating those folders, naming things and organizing them, making sure you go through the whole self-grade document and checking all that stuff takes way longer than you think. Even the upload process takes longer than you think. Sometimes that can take 40 minutes. So if you wait till 11:59 to turn in your work, I guarantee you're going to miss something that you're going to be kicking yourself for, because you're like, dang, if I had 1 more minute, I'd have seen that. So don't do that. And again, the upload process, not necessarily going to happen instantaneously, because guess what? The whole school's turning in at midnight. The internet's only so big. So turn it in early. Wait, right at 11, stop working, because anything you work on right to 11:59 usually doesn't do great anyway. Stop at 11. Take what you have, look over the self-grade document, go through the things that we're asking for, make sure you do those, and then try to put that in. Now, that being said, if you still have some time left, I got a half hour before the deadline. Can I work some more? Yeah, turn in another file. That's fine. I don't care if you turn in 2. Turn something in on time. That's important. Does that make sense? Okay, so be smart about your turn-in. Know the game you're playing and play it well. That's always the strategy, and I don't care what you're doing in life. Know the game you're playing and play it well. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I would rather a good project that I determine that project that's incomplete. Complete project that wasn't turned in.
Anything is better than a 0. You want to turn something in, because at the very least you can get feedback on it. You know what I mean? Like, even if you were a total miss, and you turned in the worst thing you've ever done in your life, but you learned your lesson and you weren't going to do that again, you at least want to get some feedback on what you turned in. Turning in nothing is not good, because you're not necessarily learning, and that's really what it's all about. I mean, you want to have good grades because that's indicating how well you're understanding the material in comparison to your peers. You have to have a way of sort of gauging how you're doing. But the reality of the situation is you need to learn this stuff, because that's how you're going to hopefully have a chance to get a job. Because if you don't know this material, the chances are a lot fewer. So you've got to learn the material. So that's really the important part. You're not going to be at a job interview and somebody's going to say, well, what'd you get in 3DF? B or an A? The letters are immaterial. That's just for you to judge how you're doing and for the school to kind of determine how you're doing. Your employers want to see great work. That's the bottom line. The letters are just an indicator of how hard you're willing to work, really. Does that make sense? And that in itself is an indicator. All righty, so good luck, everybody. Get to work. don't forget you have lab today, my local class, get in there. If you're in my digital class, go to that Google Hangout and go see the gang. They can help you out, and you can help each other. Sometimes there's another student in there. Maybe you'd rather work with another student because you're less intimidated. You know, another beginner like you. That's fine. I don't care who you're working with. Working with others, though, is definitely to your advantage if you can do it at all. Alrighty, so good luck on your work. Get it all done. Work like the wind. Turn it in on time. Those things are important. Okie dokie. Thank you for the wind effect, Brian. All right, I will catch you guys on Wednesday. We'll learn some more fun stuff and more modeling. Because that cool kids do it.